Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Kevin. Let me share my screen. I'll do my formal introduction, and then we'll just, we'll play from here. I need screen sharing turned on. Oh,
Yep,
I'm the host now. Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to kick you all off. Give me a second. All right. Share screen. I'll just share that screen. All righty. So this session, making sure you're all in the right place. You're online, so it's really hard to get it's really easy to get confused. Make sure you're all in the right place. This is building custom Vue.js services and plugins. And those who don't know me, have never seen me before, my name is Kevin Griffin. I actually do most of my work over in the Microsoft side of the industry. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I actually need to change the slide. I just was awarded for my 11th time. But I do a ton of web work focused in ASP.NET Core, a lot of deployments of Microsoft Azure, but my focus is on web development. And I like to say I go way back in web dev. But my web dev journey was starting around 2007 when jQuery was really hip and cool and everyone was using it. And I think it was most people's gateway drug into web dev was jQuery just made so many things easy and like, well, JavaScript doesn't suck as much anymore. Let me start doing that. So I've been working with the web for a long time. I've gone through different iterations, and more on that. But first, if you go to my website, consultwithgriff.com, I write about different things. I'm an independent consultant, so if you ever wanted me to come help you with any coaching, training, or come work on your team to try to get through some issues, I'm available for all that stuff. I spend a ton of time on Twitter at @OneKevGriff. I also do a somewhat regular Twitch stream, so twitch.tv/OneKevGriff. I do a lot of Vue on my Twitch channel just because I'm usually goofing off with different things. So go give me a follow and all that good stuff over there. Let's see. I work in a shed quarters. That's kind of the awesome thing about me. And so this is a picture of my shed quarters I'm in right now. And I was doing this before work at home was cool because of COVID. I had this shed delivered, finished the inside of it, and it's now my office. So it gets me away from from my wife and from my kids during the day, and it's nice and secluded. I love it to death. So I'm always happy to talk about the shed quarters some other time. So the details for this talk, if everyone wants the slides, they want the code samples. I'm going to have all that. And actually, I'm working on a blog post that kind of outlines everything I'm talking about in this session. And that's going to be available at consultwithgriff.com, Vue-services-plugins. So you can always get that after the fact. Let's see. I've been working with Vue for about 2 years. This is the first Vue-centric user group I've ever talked to. So I feel like I'm relating to everyone here. I'm that guy that goes into a user group or a conference and says, well, I have written production applications in Angular 1, Angular 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have to say them all at the same time because they're all kind of the same thing, just radically different. I've built production apps in React, and I've built production apps in Vue. And I say every single time, bar none, if I had to choose a framework today to build something in, it would be Vue. Just because Vue does Vue is all the good things I liked in Angular 1, but none of the bad things in Angular 1. That's kind of the easiest way to say it. So I spend a good amount of time in Vue. I'm always amazed by the different things I learn every day still working with Vue. And it's little tips and tricks where they're just insanely useful to me and my projects, and I think might be insanely useful to you all. So I just want to talk through that. Not guaranteeing that anything in here that I'm doing is, quote, a best practice or even the right way to do it. I go more with the idea of it works for me. and my clients still pay me regardless if it's good code or bad code. So it doesn't matter. But let's talk about Vue for a little bit. My assumption here is everyone has a somewhat fundamental understanding of what Vue is, and that if you see this sample code on the screen, you know that I'm looking at a single file component with a template and a little bit of code. The difference might be is I'm using TypeScript. If you haven't written Vue with TypeScript yet, that's okay. I think you'll understand some of the subtle syntax differences. But seeing as how Vue is going towards TypeScript anyway, I've kind of made it a personal goal of mine to make sure that I'm writing more and more TypeScript when I can. And actually what'll be funny is I might just screw up a whole bunch of TypeScript during this session because I just don't have the muscle memory for it yet. And that's coming from a C# developer. I still don't have the muscle memory for TypeScript. So we have a component, it's self-contained, and let's see, I'm getting the notifications, people trying to enter the waiting room. So let's see, let me let a bunch of people in. Cool. So components are self-contained. They have properties, you have methods, you have all that good stuff that's part of a single file component, or just a regular component. And components can do stuff. So if you have methods on your different components, you might have it go to an API and pull down some data. You might have it read something off the DOM. It doesn't matter. Your single file component can do everything within its own little shell. It keeps its state to itself. So it's not sharing state with its parent components. It's not sharing state with its child components unless it wants to, and then wants to pass that data down. But for the most part, these components are all self-contained. So this is a really cool example, and something I might do in an application where a component loads, and I need that component to go get some data. So it goes off to an API, gets that data back. It populates something within the component, and Vue jumps in, does what Vue does best, and it just makes everything look cool. Well, that's cool, but what if you have multiple components that all kind of need to do the same thing? Maybe not exactly the same thing, but they all talk to the same API, maybe just different endpoints. So here's two examples, two different components, each with their own unique state, but they're still kind of hitting the same endpoints. A more practical example that I use is with my .NET backends, we connect via WebSockets from our Vue.js apps to our .NET apps, and we communicate over WebSockets. Well, I had found myself with this need where I had multiple components that all needed to basically talk to the same WebSocket. They needed to know when new messages came in, and they needed to send messages out. One technique I could have used is each component could have maintained its own WebSocket. That's just a bad idea. So don't do that. Don't forget I even mentioned that. What you want to do is create one WebSocket and just reuse it over and over again. And you hit this use case with Vue. It's like, well, how do I build something that multiple components can reuse? And I don't have a slide in here, but you probably have used or heard of Vuex. Vuex is a great example of a process that people use to solve this problem because it's centralized state management. You can have one central global state, and you can have actions and mutations that will maintain these different connections and maintain a global state for you. And then each individual component can tie into that state as necessary. I've used Vuex successfully on different projects. I have found in a lot of use cases that Vuex tends to be heavier than I necessarily want to have in my apps. I feel like I spend more time configuring Vuex than actually doing the work. And it's normally just for, well, this little component just needs to know this thing, and this little component needs to know that thing. And they could just, they could just maintain that all on their own. But I still want to have this centralized service that does that for me. Angular 1 did this really well. You could just define a service, and you can inject that service wherever you needed it. So I had jumped in and I said, well, how do you solve this problem with Vue? And it turns out it's really simple with Vue. It's called plugins. And if you've ever used a Vue plugin, you kind of recognize this sample code. The Vue.use method inside of your main when you're creating a new Vue application, that's installing a plugin. So if you've used Vuex, you've used use. If you've installed Beautify, or name the hundreds of Vue plugins out there, they all follow the same fundamental framework for injecting functionality into Vue. So here's a sample of some random plugin I am creating, where I want to create a set of options or settings or just configuration information I want to send into a plugin. But then I just tell Vue, well, load this plugin for me, either from a local directory or from an npm package, and Vue will take it over from there. All a plugin is it can be an object or it can be a method, and it's a method that's just called install. And we're going to walk through an entire code example of this, so don't get bent up on the slides. When you create an object, or you could just have a method, and it's called install. Install is going to take two parameters. The first parameter is going to be just the Vue instance. So when Vue creates itself, it's going to pass it into your plugin. So you could do a whole bunch of cool things on top of Vue if you want to. It's there for you to mess with. The second thing is going to be the options or the settings or the configuration that you're passing in. Now, this isn't a requirement. I tend to do it on the different services and plugins I've built just because it's nice to have when you realize you need it in 3 months. So even if my options is an object that has nothing in it, it's there just in case. But as you can see, it can be undefined, so you don't have to pass it in. Now, once you've created this basic skeleton of a plugin, there are 4 different common things you do with a plugin. The first one is you want to decorate the Vue instance for any Vue component. And this is common where if the bottom example, you're in your Vue component and you say this dot. Well, that means I'm acting upon the current instance of current Vue component instance. So if I want to say, well, every component's different, but I want them all to have access to this service, I can tell Vue, well, let's add to your prototype a $service property object method. It can be whatever you want it to be. And when I call that from other Vue components, you know what to do. Now, you don't have to get caught up on the naming. I use the $service because that just tends to be what folks use when they're building stuff on top of Vue plugins. So you don't have to do that, but in all my examples, when I'm using a $, it just means this is my plugin that I'm adding on top of Vue. So you have the Vue instance that you can override. You can also override or add to the global Vue object. So you probably have seen this in some plugins before if you've done a lot of work, where I could say Vue.service instead of this .service. It's really doing the same thing, but I'm on the global Vue object versus the Vue instance. So neither one's right or wrong. They're doing the same thing essentially. But to set that up in our install method, I'm just taking that Vue object that's getting passed in, and instead of assigning to its prototype, I'm assigning to the object itself. And yay. The other most common thing I see with plugins is creating custom components. A great example of this is something like Beautify. So if you've used Beautify to implement material design into your Vue applications, you know you can load Beautify, and then in any component later go, all right, well, I want a v-dash button, or I want a v-dash data table. And those component names are all defined in Beautify's install method, just like this. So if you create your own custom component, and let's say you want to open source it, put it out there for everyone to use, your install method would look like this, where you say view.component, the tag name, and then the actual link to the component that you're creating. We're not going to see an example of this today, and actually I can reference a couple examples if anyone's really interested in seeing that, because this is pretty straightforward. The other thing I see folks doing in plugins are installing what are called mixins. I'm not going to spend any time on mixins because I actually don't fully understand why you would use a mixin, or at least I haven't had a reason to use a mixin. But the idea is, you know, with any component that gets created on the virtual DOM, there's a life cycle. It gets created, it gets mounted, it gets this, Well, what if you could globally catch those events and add in your own functionality or override functionality? That's kind of the idea behind a mixin. So that's what another kind of the fourth thing I see folks doing with plugins. But we're not going to talk about that because I have no idea what I'm talking about. But that's a gist. I don't like slides. I kind of like to get the high level ideas out there, and then I just want to jump into some code and show you all some code. So that's what we're going to do. All right. So I have already set up a demo project. I did Vue create, and let me show you what I'm working with here. This is basically an out-of-the-box Vue application. I'm using TypeScript. I didn't install any plugins. It's just out-of-the-box Vue.js. So you can look at my hello world. There's all this crap that's in the hello world. And we're going to take most of that out because we don't care. All right. So all we want is message. This is, again, using TypeScript. So you might not be familiar with the Vue property decorator for TypeScript. It just makes things like creating single file components pretty easy because it's all decorators. So you don't have to understand. We're not going to go that deep into the TypeScript. But the component I want to build, or the plugin I want to build, is just call it a simple logger. And so I'm going to go into my source and create a new folder. We'll call it services, or I should call it plugins. You know what? No, we'll leave it at services, whatever. I'm going to create one called logger. Let me zoom in for you. And then inside of logger, I'm going to create a new file. We'll say index.ts, TypeScript. And inside of index.ts, we'll create a new logger object. So logger is going to be of a type plugin object. So this is a Vue thing. If you have Vue installed, you'll have access to the plugin object. So that means up here in the top, I'll have to say import plugin object from Vue. All right, so plugin object is, if you're doing this in just straight JavaScript, you don't have to worry about any of this crap, which is what I love about just regular JavaScript. In TypeScript, you have to worry about types because TypeScript, yeah. So you have to tell the plugin object what the configuration type is for this particular plugin. And we haven't created that yet, but we'll just call it plugin options for lack of a better term. Now, I haven't created that yet, so we'll go in a moment. Plugin object, why are you? Oh, delete that one because that's the wrong one. Okay. Don't you hate it when VS Code tries to help you because it helps you wrong? Yeah, that's my life. All right, so our plugin object is just going to be an object, and it has to have an install method. Now, if you're using TypeScript with the Vueter plugin, you're going to get a little bit of IntelliSense here. So it tells me, hey, you should have an install method that takes a Vue object which has a Vue constructor, or that is a Vue constructor, and then takes in some options. So the options are either going to be undefined, not there, or it's going to be of type logger options, which we'll come back and create in a moment. And we'll just leave that method empty. Let's go create logger options real fast. So logger options.ts. I'm just going to copy and paste this from a snippet. Since it's a logger, the only option I could think of is, well, let's enable logging or disable logging. Yay. So we'll have that the way it is. Let's go back and set up our imports one more time. So we'll pull this from logger options. So that makes all of our squigglies go away. Yay. But, all right, so now I need to make this plugin actually do something. And there's a couple different approaches I could take. I could do it on the global object. I could do it on the component instance. I'm just going to choose to do it on the global object, because why not? So I'm going to say Vue.logger. And I can just create a new object altogether. But again, this is TypeScript. So we'll create a new instance of what I'm going to call a logger service. And I'll pass those options into it. Now, next thing's next. We want to get rid of a couple of these squigglies. So let's create the logger instance. So we'll say logger service TS. I am going to copy and paste more code, because why not? Let's just walk through what's happening here. When you create a new logger service, TypeScript, we have a constructor where we take in some options. Again, options are optional. So we'll either pass in the options object or we'll pass in undefined. Doesn't matter. We're going to store those away for later because we don't need them now, but we'll need them later. Those will get stored in as a private variable. So when this goes through the TypeScript compiler, it's going to get turned into really ugly JavaScript. So disregard that. Just know nothing else can talk to this options object. And I created a simple helper method for me that checks to see if options is defined. And if it is, we just send back the value of is enabled. So whether it's true or false. And then I just have three methods on this object: info, warn, and error. And in all three of these cases, if we have login enabled, we'll just call the requisite console method. So console.log, console.warn, or console.error, passing in whatever message gets sent to it. So the actual plugin you're building itself, just think you're just building an object. And that object is going to get attached to the global Vue object or to your Vue instances. So I have my logger service. We can go back to my index. And I have to pull logger service in as an import. Awesome. Okay, so that's all good. Why? All right, so these squigglies should go away in a little bit. Let's switch over to my console, and I'm going to turn on the dev server. Now, it's probably going to pop up with a couple errors just because that's the way I roll. You're not coding if you're not getting errors. Yep, see all that? Cannot find name. Of course you can't find name. All right, so now we have to deal with some of the TypeScript BS. And I'm sorry about that, but we gotta. The first thing is the TypeScript doesn't recognize the $logger property on Vue, which makes complete sense because it's TypeScript. It's looking for all these objects to exist. So the way you get around that is I'm going to create another folder. We'll just call it types. Inside of types, we are going to create a method or an object, a file, whatever you want to call it, called logger service. .d.ts. This is a crap. I created a folder when I meant to file. Create a file called loggerservice.d.ts. This is a definition file for TypeScript. And in the sample code I'll post later, I actually cover all the cases of if you're doing the Vue global object or if you're doing the individual component instances, because you have to make slight changes. So I'm going to take my snippet, copy that in. And this is the one that will fix, that should fix that error. Because we're telling TypeScript, there's a Vue object. You already know about that Vue object, but I'm going to add logger to it so you can make my errors go away. Does it make my errors go away? Oh, I think with definitions, you have to restart. Let's see if it makes my errors go away. It should make my errors go away because this is copy and pasted from another project. All right, that's fine. Cannot find name options. Did you mean option? I did. All right. This is one of the nice things about having TypeScript is TypeScript will find these little issues. If you're writing just core JavaScript, you wouldn't find that out until you got to the page and you went to run the code. So yay, thanks TypeScript. All right. So yeah, I fixed that. I'm not sure why that error didn't go away. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about using this method. All right, no type errors. Yay, that is success in my book. Let's all go home. Let's go over to our hello world, and we're going to just add some stuff to this. So I'm going to add 3 buttons. We'll just call one info. And copy and paste because that's what all good devs do. We'll say info, warn, and error. And then down in our component itself, I want to add the method. So info, warn, and error. And what should happen is because these objects have access to the global Vue object, I should be able to say Vue $logger. And this is just a IntelliSense issue with inside of VS Code, but that's legitimate. I'm going to say info and pass in info text here. The same thing with warn. I'm going to say logger warn. And then with the error, we'll just say logger error. Oops. Okay. So I'm using my plugin and ignore the squigglies again. I have one more step I have to do, and then this should just all work and we can go home, ask your questions, whatever you want to do. I have to go actually install this plugin. I'll open up main, TS or JS, whatever you're using, and I'm going to copy and paste some code. So first we'll copy in our imports. I'm going to create an instance of the logger options and add my semicolons. Use semicolons. I hate that it takes semicolons out. I will die on that hill. And with the logger options, what we're going to do is we're just going to check the environment. So if we're in production, we want to turn off logging. If we're in development or anything else, let's leave logging on. Then I want to take and tell Vue, let's use the logger that I have defined elsewhere. And this could be in an NPM package. You can put it wherever you want to. So let's take that logger that we just imported and let's use it and let's pass in the options into it. So when we walk through the order of operations, import, 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 create our options object. Vue, please use the logger with these options. Vue will go call the install method on that plugin's object. Now, if it doesn't exist, it throws an error. I don't know. I've actually never written code that bad that I have discovered what happens. Go me. But it will call that method. It passes in the global view object, and then also passes in your options if they're set. So this is your chance to do whatever you want to. You can add stuff to the global view object. You can add stuff to the view component instances. You can add your own components. You can add your own mix-ins. You can do all that in this method. The world's your oyster. That finishes. Then Vue goes off and does what Vue does. So save. No type errors. Yay. Let's go ahead and I have my. Let's bring over our browser. We have our 3 buttons. Let's open up DevTools. DevTools does not report any errors. So yay, that's another win in our book. Let's hit info. Cool. We're getting our text. Info, warn, and error. So our plugin is working. Yay, everyone's happy. Let's try something else. So let's go back to JS and Friends, just to show you it's not a one-trick pony. So I have app.vue as Hello World in it. We're going to clone Hello World. And we'll call it Goodbye World. So exact copy of the components. And we'll even rename the class. So Goodbye World. Goodbye World does the exact same thing. So in our app, we'll pull in Goodbye World instead. And we got to do all that crap you do. All right, from Goodbye World.view. We'll pass Goodbye World in. All right, everything renders correctly. Did this hot reload? I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? Well, it's rendering. So, okay, well, let's change the method. All right, so, whatever. This is clear. Now, what happens if I hit that info? So I have the same things happening. Info, warn, error. I didn't change the text, so let me change the text just to show you everything's working accordingly. And let's refresh. And I clear my console. That's a dev tip. Never clear your console on refreshes if you actually want to find out what's going wrong in your applications. All right, so if we hit info on get out of here, it's Goodbye World. So my 2 infos are doing the different things, but they're talking to the same plugin. Same thing with warnings and same thing with errors. So everything's talking to the same service. Now, what I will do real fast, just to kind of show that you can do it, we'll go back into our logger. We'll go ahead and change this to the prototype. So we'll say prototype $logger. And I've already set up the proper definition for it. That definition is off the Vue constructor instead of just Vue syntax. And now I can go back into my Goodbye World. And instead of Vue, we'll just say this, and this. So it's not on the global view object now, it's on the actual component itself. Let's copy these and let's make sure we change it everywhere or stuff will break. So now if I refresh one more time, so now if I hit info, it still works, but it's doing things the different way. So cool. That's literally all you do to build a plugin. So no There's really nothing else fancy about it. Now you can get way more complicated, but I don't want to do that. That I think this is if you're jumping into Vue, especially if you're jumping into Vue fresh, and you have built a couple components and you understand that, maybe you pulled in plugins like Vuex or Beautify or you name it. You understand that. This is kind of the next logical step in my belief. So if you have an API that you're talking to, it makes sense to build a plugin or service that talks to that API, knows how to talk to that API. You basically have API level functionality at the Vue level. Then any component can take advantage of it. If you're doing an example like I talked about earlier, where you have a web service, a WebSocket or WebSockets, and you only want to make one connection and you want to reuse that connection for anything else that needs it. Well, this is another good opportunity for a plugin. So create your plugin, and during your plugin's creation, you can make your socket connection. It can manage all the life cycle. So if the WebSocket disconnects, it can handle the reconnection. We could go a little bit off the rails and talk about, well, it also needs to be able to emit events to any component that needs to know about it. And we're not going to talk about that because I don't have snippet code for that. That's not an easy demo. But there, you start running into these scenarios where it's like, well, a plugin would make a lot of sense. And if you live in the open source world, you might build a plugin that others could take advantage of. And you just take this facade, you bundle it into a project, and you push it up to NPM, everyone's happy. So with that, why don't we just go ahead and open it up for some questions if there are any. I have the chat over here. It doesn't look like there's anyone in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if you just want to have general discussion, bring it on.
I guess my first question, Kevin, would be what are some of the most useful plugins you have used or made yourself?
All right. That is a great question, and I was semi-prepared for it. So there's a page called Awesome Vue. Let me bring it up, and we can drop this. I'll drop it in the chat as well. Nope, that's not it. Awesome Vue. Is that it? Yep. So this is a list of Vue plugins. Now I'll drop this into the chat. So if you're on Twitch, you'll get in chat. I'll drop it in the chat for Zoom as well. Chat. All right, there we go. What's cool about this is a semi-curated list of components. So you come in, here's the use case. You come in and someone says, you need you to add a tree component to this app. And you're like, oh crap, I don't want to build a tree component. Let's see if someone's already built a tree component. Scroll down the list, tree. All right, let's click on that. Here you go. You have like 24 tree components to use. I like the curated aspect of it. This is curated by the Vue.js org. So these aren't just going to be. Let me rephrase my statement. These aren't going to be. They aren't going to be awful plugins. They're going to be good enough to get on the list. So there's probably going to be some level of support. My general rule with any package or plugin that you install, regardless if it's JavaScript, C#, if you're installing Ruby gems, if you're installing Python packages, I don't care what you're developing in, always go look at the repo. So let's just pick one at random. Vue tree, that's pretty generic. The things I look at the number of stars, and I look at the last commit. So 800 stars, that means at least 800 people have liked this enough to start it, but it was recently updated 2 months ago. I think anything that's been updated this year is pretty fair game, as as good. That's just generalizing. If I see a plugin, especially for Vue, and it's 2019, like early 2019, I don't trust it enough because I know how quickly things in the JavaScript space iterate. So if it's this time last year, I'm just wondering how much of it is broken. It's also useful to look at the number of issues for any package or plugin just to see, what are people complaining about. There's a lot of Japanese, Chinese letters I don't understand. I have no idea what's going on. So someone's having a problem. I don't know what it is. But that probably goes back to the curated part of it. People are already doing that curation for you. My favorite plugins. That's a one. So one of my favorites is Beautify, because they don't even have Beautify on. Those aren't Beautify. Oh, so just Beautify. Is it? Nope, that's not it. Danger. Beautify is Google Material Design, but it's built for Vue.js. And if you just want to quickly generate a UI that people don't like scoff at, as developers, we suck at UI design in general. But if you want to build something that's semi-beautiful, I call Beautify the package that has made me thousands and thousands of dollars, because I have gone into client demos, having done maybe 3-4 hours worth of work on a proof of concept, but I used Beautify, so it looks like I spent 30 hours on it. And they go, this looks amazing. So it pays for itself. It's free, but it pays for itself easily. Other than that, I don't try to use a lot of plugins unless I have a very specific need. Like, I don't want to write a modal myself, even though modals are really easy to write nowadays with just Vue and a little bit of CSS. Things like forums. There's one called, let's see if it's in the list, Vue the Mask. I use this one a ton just for masking inputs. So you have to actually find their demo page. Yeah, demo. So if you need to format like phone numbers inside of an input box or a text box, or format a date or a time, it's kind of cumbersome to do that yourself. Vue the Mask makes that really easy, because you can just say on the component, here's the mask of the number. So it doesn't accept letters. I'm typing letters right now, but if you start typing numbers, it formats it appropriately. But the actual value, data value, is just a number, which is useful. So yeah, I should be more prepared for that question. But Vue, Awesome Vue is a great page, and this is linked directly from the Vue.js website. Oh,
that was awesome. Thank you so much for showing me all that.
Yeah, V-Money. I've used this a couple times too, just because formatting currency is its own problem based off of culture. Vue the Mask doesn't support money directly, so V-Money supports money, and yeah. The couple times when you realize, oh, I just want to format this with a $ and a decimal, and I don't want it to look bad, and you realize you could do that yourself, but it's like a half a dozen lines of code to get it right. And then I'm just thinking US dollars, but you throw in euros or pounds, or you just name other currencies. They come with their own issues, like, oh, we use a comma instead of a decimal point. It's like, nope, I don't want to mess with that. V-Money. All right. Here's the page to Beautify. So Beautify, like all this markup here, this is Beautify being used. Yeah, I love Beautify. If you just need to get some UI up and running quickly that doesn't look ugly. So I don't know how many folks out there have built apps with Bootstrap. Bootstrap used to be the go-to for not ugly websites until all sites started looking like Bootstrap basic template. And you just couldn't build a basic Bootstrap site anymore because everyone realized, oh, you used Bootstrap, didn't you? Yeah, that's the ugliest site I've ever seen. Bootstrap went from like beautiful to ugly. Now there's Beautify that just makes it look like every Google app out there, which people go, I trust Google. I trust you because you look like Google. And yeah, then they steal your data. But Beautify. And and find it in their sample code. Let me, but you see right here, I'm not going to go look at their GitHub, but you see they're just saying vue.use because Beautify is the plugin. And if you pass that object, then it has an install method somewhere in its source code. Now, Beautify complicates it because it does all this crazy stuff because they're supporting multiple use cases. But you, let's see, they're also passing in their options differently. So same concepts, just implemented, differently. So yeah, that was a good question. I spent a lot of time on this last week because I was trying to find examples of how people how they install plugins. So like vMoney, if I go into their source, probably in their index, you see there's an install method. And it's the same general concept as I showed, where you're getting the global view object and then some options. And then they do all the fancy, let's map global options to the options we care about. They create a view directive and then a view component, and everything's good. Oh, there's actually this interesting case here. I don't use this because I don't care, but there are different ways to add Vue to a page. So I'm using Vue with Webpack, so it's compiling everything. It's doing the dev server. If you're just dropping Vue onto a page and you're trying to use a plugin, you can't do the install the same way I was doing the install on my demo. What you have to actually do is what they're doing here is if Vue is on the window object, you have to call use yourself. You actually don't you don't make the developer call use on your behalf. You call use because that's just the way things work apparently. So this is one of those cases where it's good to copy someone else's code because they already did all this work for you. So if you're going to write your own, take my sample code that I'm going to push up probably tomorrow morning, or go find one of these small plugins that do one thing really well because they're not going to be complicated. You could copy this, change a couple things, and it's just like Stack Overflow. Boom, you've built a new app, and you didn't have to do any heavy thinking. All right. Any other questions, comments, conversation?
I just want to say I love this Vue awesome stuff. I wish I had this a long time ago. Have you ever used any of these Beautify premium themes?
I'm not, because I'm cheap.
Fair enough.
But I have gotten enough out of the open source free version of Beautify that I haven't had the need. And actually, one of the things I'm starting to do is I'm using Beautify less and less, and I'm using Tailwind for more and more of my CSS needs. Just because when you start getting deep into Beautify for just generic UI stuff, it gets pretty heavy. And especially when you get into the customizations, it can get pretty heavy. And it all looks the same. So if you want to get away from that, it all looks like Google apps. Something like Tailwind makes a little bit more sense because this is CSS if a developer actually wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually easy to install into a Vue app now, whereas a couple months ago it was like pulling teeth. All right. Anyone else?
I guess as somebody that's new to Vue and the React in general, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but why do you prefer Vue over Angular or React?
So,
if you don't mind explaining that.
all right. Well, I'm in a Vue meetup, so I can get on this soapbox. Well, let's go back in time. So I started with Angular 1, Angular.js now, which I call the good Angular. And we built an app on it, and it was great. I appreciated their approach to it, but then they went and released Angular 2. And Angular 2 was like a slap in the face to the entire developer community. So everyone who was investing in Angular, Google said, yep, you have to learn everything new. And the problem is that they didn't actually write good documentation to convert Angular 1 developers into Angular 2. So if you try to use Angular 1 approaches in Angular 2, you actually hit a whole bunch of walls. So we wrote a whole bunch of Angular 2 code trying to make this transition, and we just did everything wrong. And then we spent months and months of kind of backtracking, trying to fix this code and make it the Angular 2 way, and then eventually Angular 3, Angular 4. I think we stopped at Angular 6, and then we just couldn't upgrade anymore because of bad decisions we had made early on. So I had a bad taste in my mouth for Angular 2 plus at this point. And I'm an independent, so I'm always playing around with different tools and technologies when I can. And I jumped on the React bandwagon because everyone was doing React. It was the big fancy thing. And at first, I had a sour taste in my mouth for JSX, and just walking through that approach. And I built a production application with it. So a bunch of sample apps and then a production app in it. Learned a whole bunch of production issues and lessons from that. And it just kind of hit this point where I left that project for about 3 months. It got delivered, the client was happy, and clients usually go through this phase where they're like, well, don't spend any more of our money. We'll talk to you. Well, let's just see how things go. So about 3 months later, I had to come back and I had to do some work in this project. And I got into it, and I knew React. I went into this code, and I had no idea what was going on because of the way, it was just the way, I'm probably just a crappy React developer. I usually chalk it up to that. But I'm going back to this code, and I have no idea what's going on. And I'm trying to make changes to it. And I'm like, I'm on the React docs trying to learn React again because it wasn't intuitive enough to just jump back in, having known it, having written this code, to come in and maintain this code. And I mean, this is just me on my soapbox. It really irritates me. There's no concept of a repeat in React. So Angular 1 had a repeat. Angular 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 had a repeat, and there's no Angular 10 yet. But they have a repeat. And Vue's like, oh no, what you have to do is you have to map an array of objects to a component, and then we'll just put that component into, and just didn't make any sense. And I love talking to people going through the Vue tutorials, or I'm sorry, React tutorials for the first time, because they hit this point, they're like, what the F is this? And they all say the same thing. I think React developers who love React, they just have Stockholm syndrome. They're like, that's just the way it is. I mean, that's how everyone should do it. And it's like, no, things are great. So I built this production React application, put it out there, everything's good. I started playing around with Vue. And the thing that I loved about Vue was like, this reminds me a lot of Angular 1. And I loved Angular 1. And it was actually easier syntax than Angular 1. So I built a couple different sample apps, had a new opportunity for a project come up. I'm like, I'm gonna try Vue on this one. So wrote the Vue app, and same process. I got it deployed, took a month or two off, go do other things, came back to it. And I'm like, I know exactly what's going on here. Like the single file components that just make complete sense to me. I jumped back in, made my changes. The only thing I did wrong in that app was I didn't abstract my components enough. So I had, my components were too beefy. A good component is a small component. So I now I go back and I refactor. I'm like, all right, this could be its own component. This could be its own components. And we try to make things into smaller little piles because it's all getting compiled together anyway. So let's just make it all nice and easy to read and easy to write. So I love that app, and I went to another project. I'm like, I'm going to use Vue again. I used Vue again. It's the same thing. Came back to it later, and everything was great. We have our Angular 2, 3, so it's like our Angular 6 app right now. And we're actually doing something really crazy. We're slowly removing Angular and we're putting Vue in its place. And we're doing it bit by bit, piece by piece, because we were using Angular 2 for actual components. So there was a component here, there's a component there, component over here, and they lived in harmony on the page, but it wasn't like a single page application. So we can remove one component that was written in Angular and we drop a Vue component in place. And what's amazing is our file size, our file dependency graph is just dropping drastically. Like Vue just does less, it is faster, and it's just easier to work with. I'm going back into this code. Before, a client would say, hey, can you make a change to this component? I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And I go, no, because I don't want to touch that code. Or I'll add a 0 to the estimate because I don't want to touch that code. And when we got transitioned over to Vue, they would come back with a request. Hey, can you do X, Y, and Z? I go, yes, absolutely. That hour later, I'm done. And it's deployed and it's ready to go. So my life has just been so much easier because of Vue. I've also started slowly looking at, Selvete, I don't even know how you say it. Someone would have to tell me. I've never actually heard anyone pronounce it, and that's part of the problem. It's a Svelte. It's probably like some IKEA pronunciation that no one knows. What's that?
Svelte.
Svelte? Svelte. Yeah. All right, we'll go with that. So what I like about Svelte is it's similar syntax and as Vue. So it's probably just on par with Vue, just with a couple subtle differences. But I think it's good to know bits and pieces of every framework, because there are possibly cases where something like Angular 9 is going to be more useful to you than Vue, or Vue is going to be more useful to you than React. I don't try to I don't try to badmouth the other frameworks. It just happens naturally, but everyone kind of picks their main thing, and for me, it's been Vue, and I see no reason to move from it. I'm really excited about the Vue 3 release. Apparently coming down soon. I think it just entered release candidate. So I think the problem for Vue developers there is going to be how big of a jump is it from Vue 2 to Vue 3, which I haven't done. I don't like touching things like that until they're released. And that's just because as an independent, I can't afford to put beta software into production and then have to charge my client to come back and fix it when they make changes. So, but it's also why I force myself to do things like TypeScript, because I know that's all moving to TypeScript. And so if you don't know TypeScript, learn some TypeScript. That's another recommendation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for diving into that for me.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, there were some questions in the group chat, weren't there? Let's see, there was a Twitter question. Let's look at the Twitter question.
No, I was just posting about like there was a recent discussion today.
Oh, I saw
actually,
that. Yeah.
About
yeah.
I work in every framework and choose the tool which works for you. So that was a tweet from Mike from Ionic team. So I thought like someone asked about whether I should choose Vue or React or Angular. So I wanted to have them like, your question is right on time.
Ember on that list. I mean, Ember is one of those. I haven't heard the word Ember in 7 years. So I forgot that was even a thing. But
you know, there are even some applications which are developed using Ember, and maybe they are silently running without more what to tell, like
there's still a lot
more
of the world running on
publicity.
jQuery right now. I mean, it's we live in this bubble where we can afford to stay current with the greatest and latest things, but so much of the dev world out there is still running on jQuery. And I mean, like I made fun of I haven't heard Ember in 7 years, but there's probably a good amount of websites out there that still run on Ember. Oh, Discourse. So if you've ever used Discourse, it's a forum software by Jeff Atwood. So Jeff Atwood helped build Stack Overflow. I mean, that's built on Ember for all of its front end stuff. I mean, that's powering hundreds of sites around the world, or thousands of sites around the world. So it's nothing to scoff at. I definitely understand the stop with the framework wars. Yeah, I can understand, but everyone has their team that they root for. If you live in a football town, you have a football team, and if someone says, "Well, who are you rooting for? The Patriots or the Cowboys?" and you go, "Hold up." That's like you have your team. And if you live in Southern Virginia like I do, you don't have an NFL team. You just go, I don't care. I don't use whoever. I don't care who goes to the Super Bowl. As long as it's not the Patriots, I don't care.
Right. So to me, choosing a framework is always like, as long as I'm able to go to the initial docs, and if I'm able to build the hello world without trouble, that's what I'm going to choose. So if I'm able to see the docs one or three steps, if I'm able to understand at a basic level without going through some huge course or you paying more, that is what I will choose.
I agree.
For me, it has a lot to do with the community around.
Right.
Too, because I mean, and the documentation that's there, obviously, like you mentioned, when Angular 2 came out, it was a nightmare. So, I find Vue has a great community so far. What I've experienced.
Cool.
All right.
Any other questions we have for Kevin? So,
all right. Well,
thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or Twitch whenever I'm live and chat about stuff. And thank you all for coming out tonight.
Yep.
Hope you learned something. That's always my goal.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you all have a good night.
Yeah, thank you.